All right, another season is upon us. It is the Musketeer Report season preview podcast, which means, Paul, we will do the win-loss game with Xavier's schedule. That's why everyone's here. It's the dumbest piece of content I make, but people love it.
Don't say that, Rick, because this is our most listened to podcast of the season, usually by far. So it's something I always get excited for. It's something I know that everybody. It was crazy. I was at the Sean Miller radio show tonight, and I had somebody come up and ask about the predictions that we're going to give tonight. So yes, people will enjoy it. We like giving it out. We're ready to go.
So that is coming up in just a few minutes. We are less than a week away from Xavier tipping off the first game of the season. And Paul, it's a little bit different this year. Like a lot of times when we come back and we do this podcast, we may not have talked a lot about the team yet. We haven't done much preview work. So we kind of go like big picture for fans that are on the message board and keeping up with the daily interactions with the team and the reports and everything. It feels maybe a little bit slow, this podcast does. We won't do that this time because we did a preview podcast at the beginning of practice with Adam Baum that kind of got you up to date on where the roster was at and what we were expecting. And then you and I just did a podcast about a week and a half ago, kind of previewing the exhibition and the secret scrimmage game and Musketeer Madness and talking about where things were at through the first 3 weeks plus of preseason practices. So you guys should have a pretty good idea of where things were at coming into this. And if you want to go back and get caught up on some of that stuff, you're welcome to do that in the previous few episodes that aren't the Big East team previews. But Paul, the first thing I wanted to ask you to start this off before we get into predicting the games on the schedule is we've had a few more weeks here of practice, and it's been a little choppy in terms of the actual practices because we had Musketeer Madness, we had the exhibition at Dayton, we had the secret scrimmage. So what I want to ask you from that is, give me two takeaways that maybe we haven't talked about yet or that have just been re-emphasized to you over the course of the last few weeks.
Yeah, one big picture thing and then one small picture thing that actually just came up tonight. One big picture thing is that I think you can genuinely see the steps this team is making practice after practice. I think there's an old saying that you used to be able to notice the temperature every 3 degrees of it getting warmer or getting colder, that's when your body actually feels it. Feels like every 3 practices or 4 practices really, because that's how they segment their preseason practices. They'll do 4 practices, then they'll take a day off. They'll do 4 practices, then they'll take a day off. That's how they fit those practices in before the season starts. And Rick, as you know, once you practice, you can't get it back. There's only 4 practices left before the first game as we record this right now here on Tuesday night. So the way that Xavier has attacked this preseason, you can see in each of these segments going throughout the preseason. I think that's the step to me. And I talked about this a little bit on the last show that we did, but this team is so mature and so old that they're picking up on things so fast. And when somebody has a bad day, or when the team itself maybe has a bad day at practice, they respond with a great day. Today, I thought Tuesday was probably their best day of the preseason as far as practice, everybody being locked in, making shots, good spirits, smiles, everybody moving from drill to drill at a good pace, everything really clicking at the right time. It's just been a steady climb up, and you can sense that there's not as much frustration with the coaching staff where you're just trying to get everybody even on board and on pace. And I know we've emphasized that a lot, but I think it's still important to keep doing that trajectory is still going up and they haven't maybe plateaued here as you get into the early first week of November. The second thing I would say, and Sean talked about this tonight at his radio show, is that I think John Hughley, at least from what he said and what you're kind of starting to see here in the last week or so, Sean mentioned tonight on his radio show that, just very briefly, because you're not really allowed to get into the weeds about the secret scrimmage, but he did just generally mention that he felt like John played better at Notre Dame than he did at Dayton. I thought that was significant because that was the only thing that he brought up about the Notre Dame scrimmage, the secret scrimmage last weekend. To be honest, I know you could sit here, believe me, not believe me, whatever. I don't know. And I don't know more than what Sean said on the radio show tonight. I haven't asked. It's kind of one of those things where I know they're not going to tell me, so I just didn't ask about it. I don't know anything more than what Sean talked about, but for him to mention John Hughley and to see the steps that John has taken here in the last week, I think that's one particular player that a lot of Xavier fans listening to this are obviously hoping they get more out of this season with the loss of Lucina Traore. So I thought it was notable that he mentioned that tonight.
Yeah, I have talked to a few people about that secret scrimmage and gotten some details, and I posted on the message board, but one of the things I heard was that John Hughley was serviceable. in that game. So that was the word that was used to me. Again, I don't know how Sean would describe him, but that was what I was told. And that could mean that has a range of variance to it, that term, right? Serviceable. But I think the general consensus was that improved from the Dayton exhibition is what I would say. And that's probably the best way to put it. You mentioned the speed of practices and how guys are picking up on things and correcting things and how from day to day they seem to improve. And I think the transfer portal era has brought about this feeling of like you have mercenaries on your team every year, like guys that are just there for maybe a year, and it's all about their own, what they can get out of it, right? Like they're just there for the best situation for themselves. And that doesn't always make for the best team chemistry or the best guys molding together and playing the right way. And I think one thing about this group is, yes, you have a lot of guys coming together from different programs. Some of them are only going to be here for a year. So you have a little bit of that, but the experience that these guys have, not just playing college basketball, but winning programs. A guy like a Ryan Conwell, a guy like a Dante Maddox, who has definitely won, maybe not at the level of like some of the high major programs, but they've been consistent and they've been coached really well. I think those things matter a lot right now when you're talking about this team improving day to day and this team fixing things on the fly and all of that. They have guys that are pushing each other, and like, I feel like they would be embarrassed if they're screwing something up out there or they're not getting it right. I feel like this group would be embarrassed by that. And instead of taking an attitude or feeling like, hey, this coach is always on me, they would be embarrassed by their mistakes and make sure they get in the film room or get some extra work with coaches after practice to correct it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the other thing to take away from the last couple of weeks, and maybe going back to the Dayton exhibition as well, Rick, is you and I were sitting at practice last week, and I asked you your thoughts about the Dayton game just in general. We hadn't really talked about it too much. And, you know, you made a great point that I agree with, where you said it was just nice that we were able to trust our eyes from what we had seen in the preseason. That, you know, I've seen this team all preseason with filming them. You've seen them through the preseason here and everything else. And we think we know what this team looks like when they're playing against each other every day, but everybody's jersey says Xavier. And sometimes it's hard that then when they go and compete against somebody else, everybody's sitting on one bench. Maybe it doesn't come together as this cohesive unit that you're hoping it is. That Dayton exhibition showed us that, yeah, we thought this team was going to be really good offensively. They put up 98 points pretty much with ease. It felt like they could have even scored into the hundreds if they really had to. It just gave us a sense, you and I, Adam, Shelby, everybody who watches these guys, gave us a sense of, yeah, that's who we thought they were.
Yeah, it's like they look skilled in practice, obviously. They clearly shoot the ball better than previous teams did, but there is just this element of like, well, are they just maybe terrible defensively or something? Or like, is the post play going to be so deficient in terms of toughness and rebounding and defense that it really is a huge hole and they're not able to make up for that or something? And we didn't see any of that. We did see the offense flowing as we expected. And it was against, you know, you can say whatever you want about this Dayton team and them having a bit of a rebuilding year potentially, but Dayton's better than the first 4 of the first 5 teams Xavier's going to play this year. So it was a good test in that regard, and something to get them ready and give us just a little bit of a preview. And to your point, yeah, I think basically what we took away from that, even though it was a blowout, is what we've seen in the preseason from this team and practices, the positive things we've been saying about them look pretty legit so far.
Yeah.
All right, here's my 2 takeaways. All right. Ryan Conwell is going to get a ton of praise, and rightfully so. He's fantastic. I love him, and people can already see his game and why it's so fun to watch and why we've been hyping him up. But the last few weeks have reemphasized to me that Dante Maddox Jr. and Marcus Foster were 2 big gets for this team in the transfer portal. I think both of those guys are, I've kind of fluctuated a little bit since the start of preseason practice on them. It's like came in pretty high on them, maybe higher on Maddox, lower on Foster. Then as practice has gone on, it's kind of fluctuated at times. And especially with Dante, there were some times where I started to think, man, is he going to lose out on some minutes here? Like, are we going to end up getting a bigger lineup to start, which we are, Dalen Swain and Marcus Foster playing together at the small forward and power forward spots from what we've seen, at least in the Dayton exhibition. And then if Trey Green continues to shoot the ball really well and play well, like, is Dante going to lose out on the role that I had envisioned for him? And from what we've seen on Musketeer Madness and also in the Dayton exhibition, and based on what I heard in the secret scrimmage as well, That's not going to be the case. Dante Maddox is going to play a significant role for this team. He's going to bring a scoring pop off the bench that they need. And I think the fact that he is coming off the bench, I like the way that sets up for your rotations. Like when you bring him off, you might get better offensively at times, or at least in certain games where maybe you're struggling to get the lid off the basket. He can give you that microwave ability. And then Foster, he's just so solid. I really like his toughness, the length of his arms. We talked, Adam Baum was with me, I think. I don't think you were there this day, but we were kind of joking one day at practice because he had blocked a couple of shots on defense at the rim and like grabbed some rebounds down where it looked like he just rose above everyone else and snatched it away from a crowd. And we're like, man, his arms are long, which we already knew. But we were kind of joking about it, and he happened to walk right past us, and we were like, hey man, how long are those arms? And he said 7'1". Not joking. That's his wingspan, 7'1". So it just tells you that, the idea of playing him at that forward spot as this team has now gotten smaller with the loss of Lassina Traore, it's legitimate. They have a guy who can rebound and defend inside with some length, even though he's only listed at 6'5".
Yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't agree. I have a couple more notes on Marcus for something we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'm not going to, I'll leave that there. But yeah, I totally agree with you on both of those points.
All right. Second point is I like this team with Jerome Hunter at center. I love the way the defense looks. And even if Lassina Traore was here, which he would be good defensively, no doubt. But my favorite part of Lassina Traore's game from what I've seen in the preseason prior to his injury was his ability to get out and guard ball screens. He could jump out and hedge. He could do all the things they really ask of him when it comes to defending ball screens. Like Zach and John cannot do the things that Lassina could do defensively. So that's a big loss. But Jerome can do those things, and he's even more mobile. He's moving even better than that. Plus, he has so much knowledge of the system. The way that he is able to anticipate and understand where he needs to be or where he needs to be rotating to, I think makes him play even faster on the defensive end. And based on what we saw in that exhibition against Dayton, I think Jerome playing the 5 is going to be a good look for this team, especially defensively at times when they're not going up against superimposing big men.
Yeah, I agree. I thought the Dayton exhibition, the way that Sean rotated through a lot of those lineups, I mean, it felt like every dead ball, there was somebody at the table. It gave us so many good looks at what they're trying to do this year. And obviously they're not going to rotate as much in the regular season as they did up at UD Arena. But it did feel like every time Jerome was down there at the 5, yeah, you're not getting the size of Lassina, but there were points where you were just saying to yourself, all right. I mean, that Yumi and Baum were sitting up there looking at each other, kind of giving us this, all right, this could work. All right.
Yeah. And we were all wondering, like, how is that going to look? Is that going to be okay? Because not is it just Jerome playing the 5, which we've seen a little bit 2 years ago, but it's Jerome playing the 5 after coming off everything that he had to go through last season. So it's like, where is he actually going to be at, especially on the defensive end? And so far, I would say so good in that department. Now, Paul, we mentioned at the top of the podcast that we are going to do the win-loss game. So I wanted to give a little preview of what we've been watching the last few weeks, but we won't make people wait any longer to get to what they came.
Getting into this?
Let's jump right into it right now. So the games start next Monday, November 4th, home game against Texas Southern. We're not going to go through these first, let's say 5 games. I mean, you're not going to predict them to beat or lose to Wake Forest. I know you well enough to know that. So we can just say 5-0 to start, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're at 5-0. That brings us, that's Texas Southern, IU Indy, Jackson State, Wake Forest, and Siena. And that takes us to their exempt event where they will play the Suncoast Credit Arena against South Carolina in the first round. What do you think about this event? You can go through both rounds if you want here.
Yeah, I would say so. Xavier, I have them beating South Carolina and then losing that second game. I think they'll go 1-1 in this event. South Carolina to me is a pretty good matchup for Xavier. Just from the perspective of what you're looking at here in the first game, I think that's a game that Xavier will be ready for. The other side, Michigan, I'm not really sure what to expect out of Michigan this year. You have Dusty May up there, first-year head coach, takes over the program. He's trying to get his foothold. We're going to learn a lot about Michigan here in the first couple of weeks as they kind of try to, figure out what they are and what their identity is. But I think Michigan, just roster-wise, is a decent team. They play TCU. They also play Wake here early on. So they have a couple of good tests where we'll at least be able to know or get an idea of what Michigan is. I say Xavier goes 1-1 in Florida. I think that means a win against South Carolina and a loss to Michigan in game 2. If they play Virginia Tech, I'd lean more towards 2-0. And I'm not sold that they can't go 2-0, but it's just hard for me to see this team. Really, what I'm getting at here is it's hard for me to see this team getting into December without one loss.
Interesting. I felt that way initially, but then I kept going over these games and looking at this team. And I'll admit, peer pressure got to me a little bit. I thought of what the message board was going to say about me because they're already mad at me for my bold predictions or lack.
Well, they weren't bold, Rick.
They were not bold enough.
They were predictions. They weren't bold.
It's just true. So I have them with an undefeated November. I say they're going to go 2-0. Michigan, like you said, Michigan is the concern here if they're better than we expect, but just looking through that all season and all that they're having to do with, like, they have the new coach. They're the ones that are still going to be figuring out things at this point of the year. I got to go with Xavier. I'm going to go 7-0 November.
I will say the one thing about this entire month of November, and this goes for a very large portion of the schedule as well, but when it comes down to a lot of times where you talk about having the best player on the floor and also having a coaching advantage, Xavier has a coaching advantage here. You look at Michigan, not to say that they wouldn't have if Juwan Howard was still there, but you kind of start to break down the pieces and the makeups of the teams. If you're saying a new team, well, okay, who'd they bring in? Sean Miller has the advantage over Dusty May there. So, but yeah, I do think they'll slip up one time in November, and I'll say that it's against one of the teams in Florida.
And I know you well enough to this is like you doing the because I feel like I have to loss. Like, you don't actually think Xavier is going to lose to any of these teams, but you're like, I got to pick them to lose one game. I know that.
God, am I that transparent?
You don't.
Am I that transparent?
Well, of course. I mean, you are confident in this team, and I know you are. So this is you being like, I don't want to sound overconfident. I'm picking a loss here.
God, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
You should have seen.
You had them with like a record that was like 28-3, and then you were like, I got to pick one or two more losses in here.
It was 26-5. Keep going.
December. South Carolina State on the first of the month is a win, obviously, but then things start to get interesting. Paul, they go to TCU for that Big 12 Big East Challenge game. TCU is a team that I think is going to be better this year. Well, I shouldn't say better. They were actually improving last year too, but I think TCU is going to be a decent opponent for them is what I'm trying to say.
So I was debating when you talk about knowing me and knowing how I do this thing every year, I was debating between the one loss being in Florida and the one loss being TCU. I picked the one loss in Florida because I think Xavier, coming off of a little bit of a gap, I think the 2 games in 3 days in Florida, maybe there's, you're traveling really for the first time. You're down there in Florida, things are a little wacky. It's kind of, there will be a lot of Xavier fans there, but it's
a lower energy event.
It's a lower energy event, just relatively. TCU, you have some time to prepare for this game. It's a big event. You play on Sunday and then you don't play till Thursday, and you're coming off a South Carolina State game on Sunday where you're hoping that you get your legs back under you after Thanksgiving and everything. I like the way this sets up for Xavier. I'm going to say that that's a road win for the Musketeers.
I'm going to go with a loss here. And I mean, you laid it out pretty well. I don't think I have to say much more, but just being the first real test in an actual road environment, I think is big. Also, you're mentioning before that there's going to be some like opponents for the Michigan game. Michigan and TCU also play early in the middle of November. So we will have, if Xavier happens to match up against Michigan in the second round of that event in Florida, we will have that common opponent between these two teams. So it'll be kind of nice to compare those two matchups as well.
Yeah, I would say, just going into, TCU and looking at the way that they are kind of stacking up this year. I mean, it's not going to be a huge atmosphere down in TCU, right? I mean, it's not like you're walking into some like massive unwinnable environment down there. So I'm just going to lean win and kind of keep that one moving.
All right. So we both have them with one loss at this point. Morgan State is up next at the Cintas Center on December 10th. That's obviously a win. And then we get into December 14th, the Crosstown Shootout at Fifth Third Arena, back on campus for the Bearcats. We know they can't win at the Cintas Center, but they're expecting to have their best team in Wes Miller's short career at UC so far, and it's a home game for them. Can the Musketeers pull it off again?
So, quite honestly, my philosophy with this, going into this game this year is that this is a game that UC should win on paper. It's at home. It's a game that really, as a program, you need to win with this rivalry, 5 straight for Xavier, everything like that. But I mean, Rick, we did this song and dance last year, and I know it was at Cintas. And I said the same thing last year after the game. I just can't pick Cincinnati to win this game until they prove to me that they can win this game. It boils down to that. And when you look at 2 years ago, like, I understand what it takes to win on the road in this game, and the fact that 2 games ago at Fifth Third Arena, it was an empty arena because of COVID. And then the last game at Fifth Third Arena, it was, a Xavier team that was monumentally better than that Cincinnati team. That was a Xavier team that ended up being a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, and Cincinnati did not make the tournament. And it still took essentially 2 buzzer-beating free throws from Sule Boom to win that game at the end. I know Xavier had a 17-point lead, but it's a rivalry game. It's on the road. They come back to tie the game in the closing seconds. But to me, it does feel, and you say this a lot, and maybe I'm taking the words out of your mouth, it does feel to me like at some point the ball's just going to bounce Cincinnati's way. Like, at some point there's going to be a game where the shots fall for Cincinnati and they win. But to me, until they can prove that they can win this game, I can't pick UC to win this game.
Paul. I couldn't agree more. 2-0 from us. We both think they're going to beat the Bearcats. Paul, I'm completely with you. UC has to prove it one time. And by the way, let's also think about this. The biggest concern I have for Xavier is a team with a dominating 5-man in the post that can really score with his back to the basket. I genuinely like this UC team. I agree with people who think this is Wes's best team, is it's going to be improved.
Far and away.
But the one thing that, they don't have, that they're not a team that's going to throw the ball inside and punish you in the post. They have decent big men. Dylan Mitchell is going to be a nice player for them, without a doubt. Assis Bandago does what he does, but he's not, we saw it last year, he's not a guy that's going to bully you on the low block and just like give Zach and John that work and put him in foul trouble. I don't think. Maybe there's speed will running up and down the floor. I don't know, but I don't think UC is going to punish Xavier in the way that gives Xavier the most trouble. If they had a stud big man, they were going to throw it to a bunch, and they had this much improved team that is ranked higher than Xavier, I would pick this to be a loss. But until they prove it, and the fact that they don't have the way to attack Xavier's biggest weakness this year makes me feel like this is a Xavier win.
It really, it's crazy because, Xavier has, I would say, the shooting advantage in this game. Maybe not as much as a lot of people would say, but I think they definitely do have the shooting advantage in this game. Certainly the offensive advantage in this game. Cincinnati is going to be a very, very good team defensively. But if you're Xavier, you have the coaching advantage too. I think if you listen to the way that, Wes going into this game, I wouldn't be surprised if there are maybe more comments, just from the sense of, I think Wes understands that this is you got to win this game this year. If you're Wes Miller and UC, like, you got to win this game.
And I wonder about that. Like, I always thought Mick Cronin's biggest issue is he did the whole thing publicly of like, it's not a big game, we don't care about it, it's just another game. But behind the scenes, if you talk to anyone over there, his sphincter was like this at all times. You couldn't drive a nail in there. I'm wondering, like, if Wes Miller is getting to that point already, and if that's starting to rub off on his players. Because if you can't beat last year's Xavier team in the crosstown shootout, there's a mental thing going on there. There's a mental hurdle you have to overcome, or a lack of coaching. So whether it's for himself or the message he's conveying to his players in that game, I have legitimate concerns about UC's ability to win that game, period, until they prove that they can.
And the last thing I would say about this crosstown shootout this year is, you have Zach Fremantle, who has played in this game multiple times and has never lost to UC. I know he didn't play last year, but effectively he could be a part of Xavier teams that went 6-0 during his time here. Jerome Hunter's never lost to Cincinnati. Dalen Swain and Trey Green played in the game last year. They understand what it means. Yeah, they haven't played at UC, but they get it. And then you mix in a guy like Ryan Conwell, who certainly has not played in the crosstown shootout, but does have experience against Cincinnati, beat them last year in the NIT, played them twice when he was at South Florida his freshman season. I believe it was twice when he was at South Florida in his freshman season. So, you kind of look at the way that this roster stacks up. These guys have played in rivalry games. Nothing like the Crosstown Shootout, really, but they've played in big games. They understand as an experienced group that this game is going to mean a lot. And, you see they have the talent. I think a lot of people, the outsiders, would understand they'll probably be favored to win this game. And for all intents and purposes, UC should win this game this year. But I can't sit here and pick them on October 29th to win this game when over the last 5 years, there's nothing to back up that they will. Because at the end of the day, Rick, when push comes to shove, Xavier always figures out a way to win this game. Now, the counterpoint is Trayvon Blewett scored 40 points in 2017 in UC. That's the kind of effort it takes to win a game, and even that game they couldn't win. It's tough. It is really friggin' hard to win a game like this on the road. But again, I can't pick against Xavier until Cincinnati gives me a reason to.
So that's the end of the non-conference slate. We both have them at 10-1, correct?
Yeah, I think however you work your way there, 10-1 is where I see Xavier going into Big East play. That's the overarching umbrella picture for me for the schedule.
I agree with that. So we start Big East play on December 18th with the game at UConn. I have this as an L.
Yeah, so I won't rattle off all the stats again about how bad UConn is in conference openers, but they're historically bad in conference openers.
Do you believe in that at all, or do you think that's just one of those weird coincidences?
It's going back like 2 decades, so it's definitely something that you can't ignore.
Well, I would say that makes it more ignorable because it's like, why would 2 decades matter at all to UConn? Like 2 decades ago, the sport was completely different. They're in different well, I guess actually they were in the same conference as they are now. It's changed. They've gone through multiple conferences.
I know what you mean.
I don't understand why there would be any carryover for 2 decades.
No,
conference opener. You know what I mean?
No, but it is weird.
It's a great stat. It's incredible.
It's the classic, it's weird that it happened twice. It's like, it's not much, but it happened. It's like that kind of thing. It's like, it's weird, but there's not really a whole lot to read into it, but it's just weird.
Yeah. Oh no, it definitely is. I'm not buying it though. I have it as an L. Are you going with the stats or are you?
No, I have it as a loss as well.
Okay. So then they have Marquette and Seton Hall at home to finish off the month of December, but it's a little bit interesting here because you have that Marquette game 3 days after the game at UConn on the 21st. And then you have the Christmas break. You have 10 days until they play again on New Year's Eve against Seton Hall at Cintas Center. How do you see these last 2 games playing out in the month of December?
I have them both as wins. I think it's a grueling stretch there for Xavier where you go Saturday, Cincinnati, Wednesday, UConn, Saturday, Marquette. But then you get some time off, and really, I'm totally selling whatever Seton Hall's, trying to sell me. I'm out on that. I'll take that as a win, 7 days of the week. So I'll take Marquette and Seton Hall both as wins.
Yeah, I'll save some of my Big East thoughts for a little bit later when we talk more about the conference. But it's just hard to see Seton Hall being that good with the roster that they have. They're just lack of top end talent is really concerning. And you can think as highly of Shaheen Holloway as you want to, and you can think of they're doing it differently and they're going to be more about their system and their toughness. And I agree with that. I'm higher on them than most people, but even still, Xavier playing them at home, I feel confident about the Musketeers in both of these games against Marquette and Seton Hall. So we finished off December. I had them with 2 losses. You had them with
12-2.
One. Just one? Or?
No. I had UConn as a loss.
Yeah, but in the month of December, I'm saying.
In the month of December, right? I thought you meant going into the new year. Yes.
Yeah. So you have them at 12-2 overall, and I have them at 12-2 overall.
Yep.
Both.
Yep.
All right. Starting January, the first game in January is the 3rd. They play at Georgetown. I have this as a win.
Yeah, I have this as a nice little stretch here for Xavier. I have this as a win too. Yeah.
All right. Then on the 7th, they play at home against St. John's. It sounds like you have this as a win as well. I have this as a loss.
I have this as a win. I have Xavier winning 6 in a row here in this little stretch here. You go St. John's, then DePaul and Villanova. I think this is a really, really favorable beginning to conference play. I know UConn's tough to start, but I think the way that this sets up, especially with the home games, I think getting St. John's at home first, and then, well, I'll get to that in a second. Yes, I have that. I have St. John's as a win. What, you have that as a loss, though?
I have that as a loss. Part of this is just like my thing right now is I'm higher on St. John's than other people. So I'm going to go all in on that and just say St. John's sweeps Xavier this year.
Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair.
DePaul at DePaul is a win. What about Villanova at the Cintas Center?
So, fun fact here, and I did go back and check this. This is the first time that Xavier is hosting Villanova since conference realignment rather than going to Villanova first. It's wild that in 14 years, that's the first time that's happened. But it's the first time Villanova's coming here first. I say this is the 6th of 6 straight wins.
All right. I have that as a win as well. And sounds like you're going to have Marquette as a loss here, which makes this a really difficult end of January for them to follow. I have the Marquette game as a win.
I have Marquette away as a loss, which puts me at 16-3 overall and 6-2 in conference play. Yeah.
Okay, so we're both at the same spot right now with 3 losses, and then that brings up the final 3 games in the month of January. We just mentioned that game at Marquette. You have it as a loss, I have it as a win, but then you go at St. John's, home against UConn, and at Creighton to end the month. Just a brutal stretch for the Musketeers. I have this as 3 straight losses following that win at Marquette. And obviously, the game at Marquette could go either way as well. That's a toss-up. You have it as a loss. So, I mean, you could be looking down 4 straight losses here to end the month of January, potentially.
So, I have the game at Madison Square Garden against St. John's. I have that as a loss. I am very high on St. John's, but I do think Xavier can get them at home. I think it's a little favorable that you get them earlier in January as opposed to maybe playing them in March or something like that when you're fully gelled. I'll say that that's a home win for Xavier, but the game at MSG is a loss. I'm going to say they get UConn at home. I'm gonna say that they get that UConn game at home and they split against UConn. And then I have the Creighton game. It's not the pink out. They avoided the pink out, but I do say that Wednesday night game. It always feels like Xavier at Creighton on these types of days it's bizarre. It's just how it works out. I say that's a loss, and that puts Xavier going into February on my schedule at 17-5 overall, 7-4 in conference play.
Yeah, so we have them. You have them with 3 losses then in this month, right? In the month of January.
I have them at 3 in January. Yeah,
Marquette, St. John's, and Creighton are your 3 losses. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. I have them 4-4 in the month of January, so that brings them to 16-6, right? 22 games at this point.
Yeah, we've done 22. I have them at 17-5. Yep.
Okay, I have them at 16-6. That brings us to February. They start off hosting Georgetown. That is a W. I assume you have the same.
Yeah.
And then they go to Villanova at the Wells Fargo Center. I have this as a loss.
I have it as a win. I don't know.
Understandable. They've been so good in Philly.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot of data points to back that one up. So I'll roll Super Bowl Sunday, noon game at Wells Fargo. I don't know. I think that's a game that Xavier gets.
All right, then February 12th, they go to Providence.
I have this as a loss.
I have this as a win.
I guess a lot of this depends on what ends up happening with Bryce Hopkins, because I'm not sure how healthy he is right now. And that's February. That's a long way away. So he should be perfectly fine by then if all goes well. But Providence is really banged up. And I think Kim English is a good coach, but Providence is really, really banged up. It's going to take them a while to gel. I think by this point, Xavier's going to be firing on all cylinders here. But I do think that in saying all that, you drop one like this on the road. I'll say Providence gets this one if Bryce Hopkins is back and healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I have them losing to Seton Hall to end the month, the very last game at Seton Hall. I have that as a loss. So I would say either one of these, whether it's them losing to Providence or them losing to Seton Hall, I have one of those two as a loss. And then in between that, you have DePaul and Butler. They host both of those 2 games. I have both of those as wins.
Yeah, those are both wins. I have Seton Hall as a win. I think Seton Hall's bad this year. I'm totally out on Seton Hall this year. So I have them sweeping the Hall.
I'm not in disagreement on Seton Hall being bad. Like I talked about, I don't think they have top-end talent, but there is something to Shaheen Holloway's toughness and the way he gets his guys to play. And just, I feel like, especially with the Xavier group, not maybe being the most imposing in the front court, I feel like Seton Hall on the road, just one of those types of games that you can slip up against. But again, I could easily switch that to the game at Providence and whatever. I just basically feel like they're going to lose one of those two games, either Providence or Seton Hall here this month. So I'd have them at 4-2 in the month of February. And then that brings us to the final 3 games of the year to start the month of March. They host Creighton, they go to Butler, and then they host Providence. I have those as three straight wins, Paul, to end the year.
I have the Creighton game as loss. I think they get swept by Creighton this year. And then I have Butler and Providence both as wins. Now, kind of stepping back, I initially, when I go back to laughing about you saying, I know what your schedule looked like in the beginning, I had that Creighton game as a win initially. I flipped it to a loss because I just wasn't sure I saw this team winning 6 straight to close the regular season, and I felt like that was the most probable game to slip up. Also, if I go back in here, I think that was the only, I think I had Xavier undefeated at home until then, and I think that was the only home loss. I think every other loss was away from Cintas, and I don't see them I think it was. Yeah. I had them at that, up until that point, undefeated at Cintas. I don't think they go undefeated at Cintas this year. They've only ever done that once in the building's history, I believe. And I just don't think they go into, I think it's no more than 2 losses at home, but I'll take Creighton to win that one at Cintas.
I just think coming down, my thought here was just kind of coming down the stretch. I have them with 8 losses at this point already. I feel like this game is going to be hyped up as like, hey, this is a big tournament resume game for Xavier. If they get that big quad 1 game over a Creighton team that's been playing well, which I expect Creighton to be very good this season, it'll have a huge impact on Xavier's resume. And I think Xavier will be a good team, will be firing on all cylinders by the end of the season. I think John Hughley will be playing better by that point. I just think this is going to be kind of the signature win to finish off the season, right? They have 2 more games right after that, but I think they go 3 in a row, including this win over Creighton, which is going to be a very good team. And that gives them some momentum going into the postseason. So go ahead. Sorry.
The last point I was just going to say is if you told me that Xavier beat Creighton at home, huge momentum building win and everything, and then dropped a game at Hinkle, I'd be like, yeah, that probably checks out.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
that's fair. So my final record, 23-8 overall, 13-7 in the Big East. Where did you have them, Paul?
I had them 1 game better, 24-7 overall, 14-6 in the Big East.
Okay, so that's our prediction. That's what we think is going, which is a good time to bring up this topic of conversation. I see predictions as you saying something is going to happen, right? Like I believe Xavier is going to go 23-8. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, some people think a prediction, especially a bold prediction, is you saying, here's the wildest possible thing that could happen if all things go according to plan. I looked at as what is the ceiling of a team, which is what I'm going to ask you about now, Paul. What if everything goes right, what is the absolute ceiling for this team?
I'm buying it at the risk of sounding like a complete homer. I'm buying everything for Xavier this year because I'm trusting what I've seen so far over the last 5 months. I think if everything goes right and this team peaks offensively and John Hughley returns to John Hughley form from 2 seasons ago, I think this team can challenge for a Big East regular season title because I don't think the Big East at the top is as invincible as people are maybe afraid that it is. I'm not convinced that Marquette, while I do think they will be very good, I don't think they're going to challenge for a Big East title. Creighton doesn't have a ton of depth outside of the top 6. UConn, I think they're going to have some growing pains, but there's definitely a reason they were picked at the top. Xavier swept UConn 2 years ago. I think this is a Xavier team that if all goes right and they shoot really well and Marcus Foster is phenomenal and nobody else gets hurt, I think this is a team that can really challenge for a Big East title and win multiple games in the NCAA tournament.
I would say I think this team can finish in 3rd in the Big East. I know that's where they're already projected, and I have them at 4th, so it's only 1 spot higher. I just think UConn and Creighton are going to be clearly better, but I would also say Xavier can finish 3rd in the Big East and still end up with like a really good seed in the NCAA tournament because I think the top of the Big East is going to be really good this year. So where would that put them in terms of like a record or where they're at? I don't know. We're probably talking about maybe a 15-5 or a 16-4 run through the Big East as opposed to 13-7.
I would say 16 wins would be my like kind of ceiling.
Max.
But I think that could win them the league, is my point.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you could be talking about a team winning the league there. I would say second weekend of the tournament for this team is kind of the ceiling I see for them. I think a Sweet 16, Elite 8 potential run. I mean, that's as good as Xavier's ever done in the history of the program. I think this team has that potential if everything goes right. And like you talk about, John Hughley's playing well by the end of the year, and all those things are rolling together. Then I think the potential is maybe they can reach a second weekend.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say anything less than winning one game in the tournament would be vastly disappointing to me. I would go that far. I mean,
fair enough. I do think, I mean, like Xavier is one thing I'm a little confused on is like Xavier's 28th right now in the coaches poll, right? Or the AP poll.
Yeah.
That right. They're not ranked. They're third receiving votes. So 28th. That would equate to what type of seed in the NCAA tournament? A 7 seed, right?
Yeah, 7 seed. Yep.
Right. So like what do 7 seeds win at like a 45% clip in the NCAA tournament, something like that? Like they literally lose more often the 10 seed than they win. So this whole idea that like, and again, I understand you would be disappointed if they lost a game. I think most people agree with that. But the idea that it's like crazy to think Xavier might not go to the second weekend, I think is a little bit too overzealous with the team being picked outside the top 25 to start the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what about the floor of this team? We talked about the ceiling. What's the upside if everything goes right? What about if everything goes wrong? And also, what are the things that go wrong in your opinion?
Okay, so let's take injuries out of the equation.
If they stay healthy.
Assuming this team stays healthy, because injuries, yes, if injuries happen,
they're done.
We can't sit here and predict this. Yes, right, anybody's done. I think so. Right now, Ken Pom has Xavier going into the season predicted. Xavier's 33rd on Ken Pom going into the year. Their projected record on Ken Pom is 19-11 and 11-9 in the Big East play. I think that's their floor. I really think that is their floor.
I don't think that's a bad thought either, because when you think about Ken Pom, and he will tell you this, like how they do the preseason predictions and what holds the most weight in terms of predicting a team's future success, it's based off of recent history, what they did the previous year, maybe a couple years before that. So when you look at Xavier last year, I think we all realize that their preseason prognostications based on Ken Pom, which is a predictive metric, I guess, for lack of a better term, their prediction there is going to be dragged down by their recent lack of success, especially last season. And I think that's where it's easy to look at Ken Pom and say, yeah, that's probably closer to the floor for Xavier than anything, which Ken Pom has them going 19-11 and 11-9. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's to me, because I think that would put Xavier, just looking at the Ken Pom preseason predictions. Now, look, they have Villanova sitting at 20th right now and projected 4th in the Big East. That ain't going to happen. So, I mean, I don't know where that comes from. I truly don't. I don't know where that comes from. But let's just say Xavier finishes 6th in the conference, 11-9 in conference play. I would say I don't see this team finishing any worse than 6th. I really don't see this team finishing playing on Wednesday at MSG. I would say that would be disappointing to me if they played on Wednesday at MSG.
I think that would be disappointing to everyone.
It would be. I think the expectations going into this year, you should not be playing on Wednesday with this team.
Yeah. I'd say 11-9 or maybe 10-10. Like if we're talking about, hey, Ryan Conwell was great, but some of these other transfers were more mid-major type of guys. They just can't get it done consistently against Big East competition. And, Jerome and Zach, they came back and they played a lot of minutes. They played a big role, but they're just not quite the same guys, or they wore down at some point or something like that. And hey, John Hughley just never really turned the corner and got it going. If all those things go, then I think it's like 11-9, 10-10 in the Big East. Because I still think they have a lot of perimeter firepower. They're still coached by Sean Miller. Like when you look at what he did last year in the Big East with that roster, it's hard to not think they're 500 or better, bare minimum, with this group of players.
And look, to be very clear, this team, I don't want to say I expect, because that's probably putting a lot of weight on their shoulders, but I think there is a very realistic scenario where this team is better offensively than they were 2 years ago when they went to the Sweet 16 and they had all that firepower on that team. I mean, the way this team shoots the ball and spaces the floor and runs an offense it's like magic.
Well, and one thing that's really encouraging about that comparison is immediately when you say that, like my immediate reaction goes, I mean, Jack Nungy, like they don't have a Jack, they have kind of the other piece. You could be like, okay, Conwell is not Colby Jones, but like maybe he's this even better, more efficient college offensive player that doesn't have the NBA upside of Colby Jones, right? Like something like that, to where you could say, okay, I could see them coming out on top with Ryan Conwell over Colby Jones. And you can kind of look at all the other guys and figure it out. Some of them are the same, Jerome and Zach. But when you get to that center spot, it's like, well, they don't have a Jack Nungy this year. But don't forget, by the time they got to the postseason and went to the Sweet 16, they didn't have Zach Freemantle anymore. So they were playing shorthanded in the post with just Jack Nungy. It's like, trade Jack Nungy out for Zach. Doesn't give you all the same things, but in some ways it gives you more on the offensive end, more dynamic scorer, certainly. So I think that's a good comparison.
And the other thing too, you hear sometimes, people would say like, oh, it was so nice to have the big man that could step out and shoot like Jack Nungy could. Zach Freemantle can hit a three if he needs to. It's not like Zach can step into a three. Yeah, he's gotten much better. I mean, I think that area of the game. I mean, Jerome Hunter's not going to hit 5 threes a game, but he can certainly step out and hit one if he needs to. So you have spacing on the floor. John Hughley might take a three every other game. I mean, he's not afraid to spot up. That's not the shot you want, but I'm saying that form looks okay. So it's kind of one of those things where you can space the floor even at all 5 positions, no matter who's out there.
Okay. Biggest strength and biggest weakness for this team. Just give me one for each.
Strength is shooting, offensive flow. I think that's,
I said multiple scoring options, but I'm right on the same page.
Yeah. Biggest weakness, I'll go rebounding.
I said post defense, but I think that it's kind of like in the same group right there, right?
Yeah, because playing off of that, just not allowing second shots, is just you got to be able to finish off the possession.
Yep. So I think we're on the same page there. And I think that seems pretty obvious when you look at this team. Maybe we'll feel differently in a week and think, oh, actually, we didn't see this coming. This is a major issue. But for right now, those two things in terms of strengths and weaknesses seem like a lock. And Paul, if we're talking about their upside, them reaching that ceiling, who is the player that if he exceeds expectations can raise the ceiling the most?
I'm going to say Marcus Foster.
Ooh.
I'm going to say Marcus Foster because I think Ryan Conwell will end up being the best player on this team by the time the season is over, if not right away. I think Ryan Conwell was an unbelievable get in the portal, and you will see that immediately. If you haven't watched a second of Xavier basketball yet, if you haven't seen anything, Ryan Conwell is an incredible basketball player. He's going to score a lot. He's going to shoot a lot. But what Marcus Foster brings to this team, especially without Lassina Traore now, I really think that he could end up being the X factor because the way I loved the clip that you posted on Twitter last night of that drive that he had against Dayton, because it's like he's playing in slow motion and he's so strong that he just waits. He waits. Somebody sealed off. All right, I'll just kind of bully out of the way and take the layup. And then he just did that. It was just a depth. It was I know where to be. And if he can shoot. He didn't shoot last. He was coming off an injury. He's a little banged up. But he can really shoot when he's healthy, and he's really healthy right now.
Yeah, it was funny because that play you're referencing where he came off a ball screen, to be clear. So it wasn't like I said, I really like this drive by Marcus Foster. It wasn't like him just blowing by a guy. He's coming off a ball screen, but then his defender kind of catches back up to him. And like you said, he's being very patient, taking his time. And then he gives him just a sort of little subtle shove with like a little bit of the forearm, but more so the body to where he's not getting called because he's not extending that chicken wing out as he's doing it. And his defender just crumbles to the floor. I mean, falls back 2 or 3 steps and then falls over. It's like, you just don't see that a lot with college level wings and guards throwing their man to the ground just because he's that much stronger than the defender. And then at the end, obviously Zach seals off the lane and gives him an easy layup. But yeah, he's got a different style of play. But his strength and his length to me are just game-changing things. So that's an interesting pick. That's not the one I had. I went with John Hughley. I think for this team to really hit that ceiling and be a second weekend team, I'm not saying they have to have John Hughley playing well, but if he is playing well by the end of the season, man, it feels like it makes it so much easier, and it feels like they can match up better with other teams that maybe have that more physically imposing presence at the center spot.
You know what's been interesting in the last couple of weeks about John Hughley, and over the years I've kind of picked up on this just watching some of these guys as the season goes on and you get better conditioned. he's dunking the ball more. And I'm not talking about, going up, getting alley-oops or whatever, running out in transition. I mean, it could be a 5-on-0 drill where instead of laying it up, he's going up and he's putting it down with 2 hands, or he's dunking, out in transition, whatever it is, even in a 5-on-0. And the reason I bring that up is it just kind of speaks to where you were back in the beginning of the offseason, where it was just, let's get up the court, let's lay this ball in, and let's just keep it moving to the next drill. You're starting to see that become more starting to see him become more comfortable in those situations. And his conditioning, like Sean said tonight at the radio show, probably not where it needs to be right now, but he's going to learn real fast because he's going to be playing a lot of minutes right away.
Well, the other thing Sean said that was interesting is, he's arrived here 5 months ago and he's lost 50 pounds in that time. And the whole focus, first and foremost, has been get in shape, lose the weight, get your conditioning together. But in doing that, you're not necessarily fully focused on improving your game. That's not to say he's not still doing basketball stuff. He's not in practice every day. But I think Sean's point there was like, we're just now getting to like the real nitty gritty of developing his skill, his footwork, and doing all the things we want him to do on the offensive end. Not that they haven't worked on any of that, but he's just now getting to the point where he can do it effectively, consistently, because the conditioning's there and he's moving quicker and all those things. So Sean's point there was that he thinks it's going to take him some time, that it might be a few months, but he said in the coach's show tonight that after Christmas, he thinks John Hughley would be playing his best basketball. And I think that lines up with what we've seen throughout the course of the preseason as well, that he's not quite there yet, but he's showing signs of getting there. It's coming along. I think, it feels funny to say, give him a few more months when the season's about to start next week, but like legitimately, we've seen that before where guys play much better in the second half of the season. And I think he could be one of those guys for legitimate reasons.
Yep.
All right. Assuming the starting lineup is Davion McKnight, Ryan Conwell, Dalen Swain, Marcus Foster, and Zach Freemantle, which was the starting lineup in the Dayton exhibition. What role do you expect out of each of these bench guys? We're going to go one by one here, starting with Jerome Hunter.
Vital. I mean, just what we already talked about him defensively, what he's going to have to do down in the low post at the 5 when he has to play at the 5. He's going to be I think he's going to be eased in as far as minutes go, because he's still, I would say getting his legs under him. He's conditioned, he's playing, he's practicing everything, but you want to see him out there in game action. You want to see him really getting up and down. But
that's changed dramatically. Well, I shouldn't say dramatically, but it's definitely changed in terms of like the early minutes after Lassina Traore's
injury. Yes, no doubt.
When Lassina was in there, I was like, oh, Jerome might not play a lot to start the season. They're really going to take it slow, and who knows how much will impact it. But now that Lassina's not in there, they're going to need a lot of minutes out of Jerome, whether it's the 4 or the 5, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
John Hughley, for me, is the next guy on the list. And I think Hughley is going to play a big role. But like we just talked about, I think in terms of the overall minutes, that's going to increase as the season goes. I think he'll start off where people are going to be like, why isn't he playing more? Or, man, he got in foul trouble again quickly. He can't stay on the floor. Those types of comments. And then as the year goes on, hopefully he'll be able to cruise past 15 minutes a game easily, and we won't be talking about how often he's on the floor or whether or not he's in foul trouble or how good a shape he's in. And I think, he's not going to have starter minutes, but I think by the end of the year, he's going to be like probably 7th man in the rotation, 7th or 8th.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're talking about easily 20 minutes a game there by the end. If everything's going right and John's in the shape that he needs to be, you're talking 20-ish there by the end of the year.
What about Dante Maddox?
Dante's a guy that has, he crosses over half court. He's ready to pull. He's ready to shoot. And I think getting a guy like him, you talked about it earlier in the show, being able to bring in somebody like him, and I would say Trey Green too, but Dante is so big defensive, like physically, defensively, can stay in front of somebody that I'll be interested to see how they use him both on, defensive specific possessions, maybe at the end of the game. And then also offensively, he's so fluid in his shot, and he can shoot it so well that if somebody's off, plug him right in, boom, you're ready to go.
Yeah, it's funny because I think one of the things we forget about with all these guys changing teams and transferring year to year is even if they're really well coached and like they're a basketball head who's always in the gym, like Sean said about Dante, is that they come from different systems and they had different principles. And if you're like a guy who played in the same system for 3 or 4 years and you learned a certain way of doing things and you had a very rigid defensive style, and then you come to Xavier and it's like, well, no, we play pack line. We don't deny, or we don't get out in the lane. I'm not saying that's the situation done. I'm just saying for all of these guys that transfer, that type of thing can happen. I think he's had a little bit of that as he's gone along, to where it's like he's a smart basketball player, but he hasn't fully picked up Xavier's system at all times throughout the preseason yet. And I think over the last few weeks, you've started to see everything clicking a little bit more for him, and signs of improvement have been coming along with that. I think, with Jerome and Dante, those two are almost starters for this team. Like, you have almost 7 starters with this group. John's minutes, I think, are going to be a little bit different because of the reasons we've talked about, but he's also going to play an important, almost starter-like role for them. It's really going to be like a top 8, I think, in terms of the rotation. That's
a great way to say it, because it's weird saying that these guys are coming off the bench, and then instinctually as a sports fan, as a basketball fan, as somebody that, you look at here and you look at these guys and you say, man, is Jerome Hunter, after everything we've heard about with Jerome and the importance of him to this team, and John Hughley and Dante Maddox, are these guys really coming off the bench? Well, yeah, somebody's got to start, but at the same time, it speaks to the quality depth of this team, not just depth, but quality depth, high quality depth, that they're going to be able to come off the bench, slot right in, and play at a high level.
So we just named 8 guys, and we didn't say Trey Green's name yet. And Trey Green is a guy that, coming in last year, I was super high on him. I think he did some really good things at times last year, and there were obviously some concerns about, can he defend at this level? Can he stay on the floor long enough doing all the things that Sean Miller needs him to do at that point guard position to give them what they need for him to play a significant role? And I think he's going to play a pretty good role on this team. But I feel like there's going to be, at least starting out, a little bit of a separation between like where he's at and where the first 8 are at, maybe minutes wise. He's going to be a little bit more specialist role. He's coming in for a couple minutes at a time to really heat it up, get some quick threes off. And because of that, I think we may see less of him at the point guard position this year. You have Ryan Conwell, who can take over at the point when Davion's not out there. Davion's mostly been playing the point. You play Ryan there a little bit, and that allows Trey to come in and really just focus 100% on why you have him on the floor, which is to knock down a couple of quick threes.
And I think there are going to be a couple of games. You saw him, what he did against Providence last year. I think that will happen multiple times this year, because he just shoots the ball too well. It's like, it's hard to put into words. I mean, I guess, somebody, you bring up Brad Redford, but like, that's the only comparison I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's different too. And I love Brad, but it's different. I mean, they're different players. Trey has to be consistent enough in all the other things that they feel confident that they can play him every game and give him a little bit of time to get going. Because when you're a shooter with his type of range, you need more than just like coming in, run off one screen and getting one shot up, right? Like, he's more than that in terms of being a specialist. But I think if he can get that type of minutes and that type of role consistently, then to your point, he is going to have multiple big games where he plays as big of a role as anybody and stays on the court, because he does just shoot it unlike anybody else on this roster. And that's, Ryan Conwell's a hell of a shooter. Dante Maddox Jr. is a hell of a shooter. But the things we've seen Trey do this preseason in terms of range, in terms of consistency, in terms of streakiness, where he has a day where he gets hot and just seems like he can't miss from long range during live action. It's too impressive not to play some type of role.
Yep.
And then Cam Fletcher is kind of the big wild card here on this team. I know people had asked about him on the message board. My response has been the same every time we've brought him up. Don't expect anything out of him early. I don't think he's really in the rotation much at all right now. They planned this all from the time before he even committed. This was planned. He wasn't going to play a big role. They're going to be extra cautious with his recovery, but farther than just the recovery, like, you have a good roster ahead of him too. And he's trying to learn everything and pick him up as he's coming back from his injury. So like, he's not in the rotation right now, I don't think, in my opinion. And that could change as the season goes on, but I wouldn't expect much out of him before we get into the new year.
Would you say for the entire season, I'm not talking about minutes at the end of a game against Texas Southern or whoever, over under 9.5 meaningful minutes from Cam Fletcher on the season?
9.5?
9.5.
I'll go under. My prediction right now, as things stand, now maybe it'll change. Maybe we'll say like Xavier's front court really needs another 6'7", 6'8" body in there that's tough and physical or something like that to where they just have to play him. But right now, I think they kind of have their group, and Cam Fletcher was always taken with next year in mind. Like, this is a recovery year for him, but he gets to practice, he gets to learn the system and familiarize himself with Sean Miller and the coaching staff to where when next year does start, like when they get going in the spring next year, he's not just figuring things out. He hits the ground running and playing at a high level. I think that's always been the plan for him. So again, it's not to say it precludes him from making some sort of impact this year, especially later in the year. But if you're holding a gun to my head and saying predict, I'm going to go under that 10-minute mark, and I'm going to say he doesn't really play at all this year. He's more so for next year.
I would agree with that. 100%. I would agree with that. And I think too, just like you said, learning the system, getting acclimated to where he needs to be on the court, not constantly being told this is what you need to do, this is where you need to be in the system, those kinds of things. Just kind of learning the game in Sean Miller's system. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but that's where we're at.
And mostly, like, we're talking about the pack line more than anything right now, because his value, if he were to play minutes for this team, is defensively and rebounding. He's big, he's athletic. He is. And if you look at almost any scouting report of him or any write-up of him from his previous stops too, the word disruptive is constantly brought up about him. And it's funny because it's the first thing I would say about him, but he's disruptive to his team and the other team at times. Like, he's not always in the right spots. He doesn't always know where he's supposed to be. He's kind of playing outside the system a lot, but he gets deflections. He's athletic. He makes plays, especially on the defensive end and in transitions. So there's some upside there, but I do think, to your point, like, once he really has a full grasp on what they're asking of him and where they want him to be, to where, okay, we can rely on you and we know you're going to be in the right spot most of the time. Now go ahead and freelance a little bit and make some of the plays that you're capable of making that maybe other guys aren't a little bit. I think he'll be much more successful for the Musketeers.
And like you said, he does have the body build of somebody that Xavier could really use if push came to shove.
Yeah, he's built like Najee Marshall. I mean, that's if you're trying to think, it's like wiry, strong, athletic, 6'7", 6'8"-ish, can rebound.
That's a great comparison. Yeah.
He's got Najee Marshall's body. I mean, their listings are identical. So that's kind of a good way to look at it. And then finally, Roddy Anderson is on this roster, transferred from Boise State. I've been asked about him. He's not going to play this year because he's redshirting. So it's not even an option that he'll play a role on this year's team. But Paul, watching him in practice, I didn't have high expectations for this guy. I kind of thought it was like an insurance policy for like, okay, if we can't get a point guard for next year, this guy maybe after being in our program for a year will be serviceable. I think he's much more than that. Defensively, I think he's a game changer. And offensively, he brings way more to the table than I thought he did.
The dude is really good. He is really, really good. He's blinding fast. I've never seen a point guard play at the speed that, and that's coming from somebody who's now watched Davion McKnight for a year and a half. I mean, Roddy, to a point where sometimes Sean will have to say, like, hey, hold on. We want you to play fast, but don't play out of control fast. Like, that's Roddy's biggest goal here in this redshirt season was to improve his three-point shot. But I'll tell you one thing, he is making everybody in that backcourt noticeably better around him because he's, for one, playing as well as he is and making them guard him. And two, it just gives everybody kind of a little bit of a different look that you're thinking, okay, now I know this is the 24-25 season preview, but if you look at next year and you can figure out, the NIL situation to bring back Roddy Anderson and Lucina Traore and John Hughley and Trey Green and Dalen Swain and Ryan Conwell, I mean, that's 6 right there where you go out and you get a couple of studs in the portal and you have Nick Lewis coming in too in the backcourt. And I mean, Jaden Forsythe, I mean, not to get out ahead in front of myself, but like Roddy Anderson is really, really good.
Yeah, and I think Roddy, out of that group that you just named in terms of like, nothing's guaranteed from year to year, but Roddy to me is locked into next year's roster. Because I mean, the decision he made this year when he decided to come and sit out at Xavier, I think was a very mature one and a very smart one for a guy in his position. He had bounced around at 2 different programs in his first 2 years of college basketball. He played a lot at both of them, but he wasn't very efficient. And a lot of people were kind of criticizing him not playing winning basketball. And he said, okay, let me find a good program, a high major program with a great coach with a great reputation of developing guards. And he found it and he said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to sit out. I'm going to learn your system. I'm going to learn under you for a year. And I'm going to be really good a year from now. And Paul, like from what I've seen, it's working out. I just can't believe someone in this era was willing to do what Roddy's doing right now. Now, I assume the NIL payments probably help that because you're getting an extra year of money to sit out and not play. It extends your earnings in college. But man, not a lot of guys are saying, yeah, let me go somewhere when I can transfer anywhere and play right away, and I'm going to get paid to do it. Not a lot of guys are like, let me sit out this year and just get better and learn your system and learn from a highly qualified coach.
It's almost like we're missing something. And I guess what we're missing is the fact that he's not a good 3-point shooter. But what I will tell you is he's improved. I know it's only October and he's got a year until we even see him on the court for Xavier. But it's like there's almost something where you're thinking to yourself, what else I have to be missing something, because that's how good he is. And if he's as good as he is now, and we're sitting here and people are getting excited about, man, who is this guy and what's he going to look like next year? You have a year until you see him, and you can only imagine he's only going to get better. So to me, you have Davion McKnight running the show this year, and then you seamlessly roll into, Roddy Anderson and Nick Lewis and potentially, Ryan, Trey, whoever it is next year. I mean, that's a lot of talent.
That was unfair what we just did to the fan base. I'm sorry for that. That was truly, truly unfair to do to get you all excited about a guy who's not going to play this year. And honestly, we probably shouldn't spend 5 minutes talking about a player who's not on this year's team, really. But I feel like it's worth talking about because of what we've seen in practice.
Yes, I mean we've watched him every single day since June. I've seen every single.
Well, and he stood out enough to comment on. Typically, if there's a guy sitting out, I would not be talking about him right now on a preview show like this. I'd be like, yeah, we'll talk about him later in the year, next year, whatever. Now's not the time. With Roddy Anderson, I think it's I can't tell you how much more impressed I am than I expected to be.
He could slot in tomorrow, and I would have full confidence in this. Yes. The ceiling.
If he was starting instead of Davion McKnight, I would think the team is basically in the same spot.
Yeah, the ceiling of this team would, and that to me, I think that just gives a kudos to Roddy for kind of the player that he is and what you can expect out of him going forward.
Yeah. All right. That's enough red shirt talk. Let's get into the Big East order of finish. We've talked about this a little bit already, but let's just give our predictions. I think you're in position to run them down 1 through 11. We know the coaches preseason poll went like this. It was UConn, Creighton, Xavier at number 3, Marquette at 4th, then St. John's at 5, Providence, Villanova, Butler, Georgetown, Seton Hall, and DePaul bringing up the rear. Paul, do you want to give us your rankings first, or do you want me to
go? You go this time.
Okay.
I did the schedule one first.
So I had UConn and Creighton the same as the coaches poll, 1 and 2. I had St. John's at 3 and Xavier at 4. So I moved Xavier down a spot from where the coaches had them. I have St. John's bumped up 2 spots into that 3 hole. And then I have Providence at number 5. And I have Villanova at number 6, which I think might come as a bit of a shock to you.
Interesting.
Marquette is 7th for me. I'm lower on Marquette than I think anybody is. I don't understand how, just because you have continuity, which I understand is it's a worthwhile conversation in the age of transfer portal and NIL, to be like, yeah, we're bringing back a lot of guys who know our system already. That's going to be good. But you basically lost your 2 best players, and not just your 2 best players, but the 2 players who kind of brought in that entire style of playing on the offensive end the last few years that made them so successful. I just don't understand how you get better or stay the same without bringing in any other talent. I mean, they made no new additions. They lost their 2 best players, and they're like, yeah, we're going to be as good or better. I don't understand that.
I am fully with you on Marquette. I did pick them a little higher in my order of finish here, but I'll continue on the Marquette kind of talk there. I'm not going to rehash what you said, because I 100% agree with everything you said. And what I will add on to that, and this feels like a flaming hot take, just given everything I've listened to in the last 2 weeks I think I've consumed every bit of national, Big East preview podcast.
You were on most of them.
But I think I've listened to or contributed to as much as I can of Big East preview content over the last 2 weeks. And the preseason player of the year or All-American hype or whatever it is, for Cam Jones, I know I'm doing a Xavier podcast here, but if you were at the end of the year were to tell me that Ryan Conwell had an equivalent or better season to Cam Jones, I would not be surprised. That's how high I am on Ryan Conwell. And I just wouldn't be shocked if that's where we were sitting here at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, between those two players, you have to give the nod to Cam Jones because he's done it in this conference already. And
agreed.
Good. Like he's really.
I'm just
good.
saying, like if we're doing bold predictions here, Rick, I'm trying to be bold.
Paul, to your bold point, if I'm Xavier, I'm not making that trade right now. Even though logically I have to be like, yeah, Cam Jones deserves to be called the better player because he's already done it. If I'm Xavier, I'm not trading Ryan Conwell for Cam Jones straight up right now. I'm not doing it. I think Ryan Conwell's better. He has to prove it first, but I think he's better.
All right. I will do my 1 through 11.
Seton Hall, Butler, Georgetown, DePaul is my final 4. There you go.
Oh, okay. All right. Man, you have them in the final 4?
Seton Hall, Butler, Georgetown, DePaul. Final 4.
Final 4. Yes, got it.
Final 4. All Big East final 4.
Got it. I will go 1 through 11. I say UConn 1. I'm not going to be the one that gives Danny Hurley any bulletin board material here because he would listen and he'd find it. UConn, I'm going to have Xavier 2. I think Xavier finishes 2nd. Say Creighton 3rd, St. John's 4th. I'm really, really high on St. John's. I debated even flipping them and Creighton, but I feel like Creighton's so good. I'll keep Creighton there at 3 and St. John's 4th. Marquette 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Marquette 5th. I have Providence at 6th, and this kind of rests on Bryce Hopkins being better than I'm afraid he might be just coming off that ACL. But I'll say Providence is there at 6th. I say Seton Hall 7th, Butler 8th, Villanova 9th, Georgetown 10th, and DePaul 11th. I think this is it for Kyle Neptune. I think Villanova has.
So is that just you're so out on Kyle Neptune that you think he'll drag them down, or do you think the roster isn't very good either?
I don't think the roster is good enough to make up for Kyle Neptune.
Fair enough.
They definitely have pieces like computer-wise. If you're going to get ranked 20th on KenPom, I guess something had to happen, right? But like I just don't know if it's enough to overcome the deficiencies they've had the last couple of years.
I was all in on the making fun of Villanova during the transfer portal period there, back in the spring when everyone was like, what are they doing this? Like Kyle Neptune has no clue and this roster stinks. I was in agreement upon all of that. But I don't think a lot of people saw they finished up the transfer portal pretty well. Luka Poplar is really good. So I don't know. I like Villanova's team okay. They're not deep, but when have they ever been deep? The whole problem is Kyle Neptune, and that's a legitimate problem. So if anyone wants to pick them 8th, 9th, 10th is probably a bit too low, but 8th or 9th, it's hard for me to argue against that because of Kyle Neptune. But yeah, I had him 7th.
The other thing, the kind of wild card here is Seton Hall. I don't think they'll finish 10th, which is where they were picked in the preseason. I don't think they'll finish 10th. But if you were to tell me they'd finish 9th or 8th, I'd be like, yeah, well, we just don't really know. There's a whole lot of question marks there.
Yeah. Seton Hall to me is I think they're not bad. I think they're going to look pretty good in non-conference play. I'm sure they'll be tough. He's got a much deeper roster, which suits his style of play more with the pressing and playing all out balls to the wall every second you're on the floor. And we'll run 10, 11 guys in and out of there. That's more what he wants to do. And he didn't have that option last year. So in that way, I think this roster fits him better, but I just look like every game they play, the opponent is going to have the best player on the court for sure. And maybe the best 2 or 3 players on the court. And I just don't, even if you have a great system and you're really tough and you have great chemistry on your team, I don't know that they have enough to make up for it. And also I had Villanova at 6th, not 7th, by the way.
Going back to, I know I'm bouncing all around here, but I'm just kind of cleaning up some
We're
notes.
at that point of the program.
I'm just kind of cleaning up some notes here. One thing that if you've listened to this show for years, you know that Rick's biggest point when we get into doing a preview for a game and we're picking actually during the season who's going to win each individual game, you always say, if it's a toss-up, you pick the best player on the floor. Well, I feel like through the summer where we're watching the blue-white teams, they scrimmage at the end of practice or whatever it is, you, me, Baum, Shelby, we'll look at each other and we'll say, all right, who do you think is going to win today? And to me, the first thing I do is just look, all right, where's Ryan Conwell? Which team is he on? And way more often than not, that serves me well. That's kind of how I've looked at him and his role. That's unrelated to everything we just talked about with the Big East, but that was one point I wanted to bring up where you talk about having the best player on the floor. He's good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that will matter in the Big East when you're looking at like how many teams have a player better than him. Okay, yeah, you say like Marquette, maybe Cam Jones is better than him or deserves to be called that based on what he's previously done. But I mean, Ryan Conwell's right there, if not better. You can go down the list. UConn, like maybe Liam McNeely is going to be amazing. Maybe Alex Caravan's the best player on that team. Either one you can probably put slightly ahead of Ryan Conwell, but I'm not going to feel totally lost in that matchup if Ryan Conwell is my best player versus their best. Creighton, Ryan Kalkbrenner is obviously the best player on the floor in that game, but he's a center. He's not a guard making plays the whole game. So again, I feel like Ryan Conwell is the best guard in that game. You can go down the list, really. Kadari Richmond at St. John's needs to be listed ahead of him. But most of these teams in the Big East, you'd take Ryan Conwell as your best player.
Yeah. All right. Of the teams that the coaches picked to finish at the bottom of the conference, Rick, Nova, Butler, Georgetown, Seton Hall, DePaul, who is most likely to continue the trend of a team that overperforms?
Yeah, of course, this came from the great Charles Bronson. He noted that the past few years, there's been a team that is expected to finish well under 500 that exceeds those expectations. Last year, it was Seton Hall, who finished 13-7 after being picked to finish 9th. 2023, it was Marquette that finished 17-3 after being projected to finish 9th. And in 2022, it was Providence that finished 14-3 after being projected to finish 7th. So out of Nova, Butler, Georgetown, Seton Hall, and DePaul, I mean, based on what I just said, it has to be Nova or Seton Hall, right? I think like Nova is probably who I'd lean to, but I have them in 6th. So that feels like a bit of a cop-out. It's like they got to move up one spot to get in the top 5. I don't think that sounds crazy. So I guess if I'm like really going off the coaches poll, it's probably Seton Hall, because I think they're picked to finish 10th, which might be 2 spots too low for them anyways. They could be better than both Georgetown and Butler without even needing to improve or have some like out-of-body experience. But if they do have a much better than anticipated season, then I mean, Seton Hall could be a team looking at that like 5th, 6th, 7th spot potentially, I think.
Yeah, I would say going off the coaches poll, the answer is Seton Hall. Going off the Paul Fritschner poll, I would say Villanova. If maybe it's just their pure talent that that carries them this year. And Poplar's great, Eric Dixon's great. They have a nice little run there on the season. Then Villanova could be my answer there. But off the coaches poll, it has to be Seton. There's no way Seton Hall finishes 10th.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, I don't think they're worse than Georgetown, and they're Butler. I don't know. Butler, I go back and forth on, because they have 2 really good players that I think are. I mean, to bring 2 players back like that is pretty solid in this day and age. But I question their post play. I question a lot of things around them. So I don't know what to do with Butler. I feel like Butler's kind of the bottom of the conference until they're not for me.
Yeah,
bottom half. Big East preseason honor. We had Ryan Kalkbrenner, player of the year. Felt like that was pretty predictable. Liam McNeely from UConn, the freshman of the year. All Big East first team: Alex Caravan, Cam Jones, Bryce Hopkins, Kadari Richmond, Eric Dixon. No arguments with any of those. I think that's nailed it. Second team: Pierre Brooks, Jameel Telfort, Davon Smith from St. John's, Zach Freemantle, and Davion McKnight from Xavier. Then the third team was Aiden Mahaney, Stephen Ashworth, Jaden Epps, Wooga Poplar, and Ryan Conwell. Have they ever done a preseason third team before? Or?
I didn't remember that.
I don't either. They definitely don't do it in postseason, or haven't in the past.
I don't remember it. Maybe they do, but
in the past, it's always been first team, second team, and honorable mention for postseason. I don't know about preseason. Maybe I've missed that. But I guess the thought that a couple people brought up, which I agree with, is that I would probably have Ryan Conwell on the second team and Davion McKnight on the third team if I was talking about the Xavier guys. Just my personal opinion, but I understand why that wasn't the case. I think the Big East coaches, and we've heard Sean talk about Davion a lot, the Big East coaches, I think, really value Davion McKnight because of the way he pushes that pace in Xavier's offense. I think it makes them feel like, man, he really makes it tough on us. He plays at a different speed.
Look, if we're sitting here having said everything that we've said over the last hour and 18 minutes, I think the take has to be that Ryan Conwell finishes higher than the third team.
Yeah.
Because that's just how we've built him up. But I think you make a great point that it goes to show what they think of how well Davion McKnight did last year and what he can do again this season, already having a year under his belt.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it. Do you have any other thoughts on the Big East that you wanted to add? I have I want to talk about the docu-series a little bit. You guys did a preview of that, but anything else on the Big East to wrap up here?
No, nothing on the Big East. The one question that we didn't get to that I thought was interesting. Do you think Ryan Conwell or somebody else on this team will make 100+ threes this year?
Yep. I'm sorry. I had that on here as well. If someone is going to, it would be Ryan Conwell. But part of that equation too, that you got to remember, is Ryan Conwell and Indiana State went to the NIT championship game last year. So he had a lot of games to knock down those 107 threes or whatever it was that he hit. If someone will, it'll be Ryan Conwell. I could see if I have to go over under, I'd go like under and say he gets 98 or something. Like maybe he's just under because it's spread out a little bit too much, but he's going to be right there.
I was just going to say it's a function of shot distribution and the amount of shooters that this team has that I don't think somebody will get to 100. But if it would be Ryan.
Yeah. I mean, Quincy Oliveri ended up with 106 last season. But how often were we talking about this team's lack of 3-point options and him being forced to do everything? Granted, you might get a couple more games this season to accomplish that feat, but it's hard to imagine anyone making as many as Quincy did last year based on the circumstances.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, last thing here. You guys did the premiere of the first episode of the All In docuseries, which I imagine everyone knows what that is by now. How did that go? And what's kind of the next step? When's the actual air date on Fox 19?
Yeah, it was awesome. I know there were some people on the message board that were there. I saw a lot of people that, I know are active on the message board that were there. And I appreciate everybody that came up, said, hey, watch the show. I thought it was a great night. There was a speech at the beginning that our boss, the founder of 1831, Anthony Breen, gave that I'm hoping we can kind of convert and crop and get up. I thought it was a really good pitch on kind of the value of Xavier basketball and what it means to this school, and actually putting numbers and data and stats and figures from a financial aspect behind it, kind of pushing this forward and why this docuseries is important and everything like that. Sean watched it. He gave a speech at the end. Hopefully we can get those uploaded and recorded in some way. They were recorded, uploaded in some way, so people can see them. If they do get posted, probably from the Sean Miller Podcast, Twitter and Instagram, I'd highly recommend listening to them because both of them are really intriguing with just some of the stats and figures that they had in there. But overall, I thought the show turned out great. I thought the night was really fun. I think people will be really excited to see the show. I will say, as far as kind of the flow of the show goes, so the first show will come out on November 12th at 11:30 on Fox 19, 11:30 p.m. Xavier plays that night. So they play at 8:30, game ends. You can go home. You can watch the show at 11:30. It'll come out the next day on YouTube. The only difference between YouTube and Fox 19 is that YouTube will include the limited profanity, but a little bit that we left in there. Fox 19, obviously, FCC can't have that in there. That's all bleeped out. But it's the same show otherwise. It's all the same content, 44 minutes of content stretched into an hour-long TV window on Fox 19. It'll all be available on the Sean Miller Podcast YouTube page. You can see where the trailers are. There's already a playlist. It'll just kind of slot right in there. The way that the show will work, I think this is one thing that, we'll talk about more on the Sean Miller Podcast. But again, just kind of in general, there won't be one every week. I know Hard Knocks is every week, but it's a team of three of us. It's me, Adam, and Josh, our video editor. So, the turn time on being able to shoot all of this content, edit it, get the approvals, get it out, and get it on TV. It won't be weekly. I think more so you can probably expect one, I would say 3-ish weeks. We don't have a hard schedule on release dates. That's kind of based on the content and the games and how everything plays itself out. But the first episode, people that watched it know, people that haven't seen it, it's based entirely on the off season. Obviously, we released it. We haven't watched a game. They haven't played a game yet. The second episode will kind of catch you up into the first game. And then by the third episode of the show, you'll be fully caught up to where we are in the season. That was just kind of a function of the release dates and the timing on TV and everything else. So by episode 3, you'll be fully caught up to the, as we would say, present day of the season when that episode comes out. But that's sort of the layout of the show so far.
I haven't seen it yet, so I'm looking forward to that November 4th air date.
12th.
November 12th for air date. It's the second week of the season will be the first episode.
Second week of the season. Yeah,
All
we were fighting the World Series tonight, and then Election Day next week, so we had to push it a couple of weeks.
That's understandable. So I've heard good things from the premiere last night at Cintas Center. Sounds like people enjoyed that, so we're all looking forward to it. Paul, any parting thoughts here as we sign this one off? We're almost 90 minutes into this thing.
No, I mean, obviously, always appreciate everybody listening. And Rebound Rundown, a small little plug. Rebound Rundown is back. If you're listening to this on Wednesday morning, the Rebound Rundown, I'll have just published my first one. I had a great conversation with your guy, Coach Horn from NKU. I think that one's going to go out later this week.
Hell yeah.
Really interesting on mid-major scheduling and how, as it relates to Xavier fans that might go in and check that NKU preview out. We spent about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the show because I've heard a lot of people talking about the schedule this year and Xavier's schedule overall and how miserable the non-conference is. And this is actually one point I want to bring up. I'm glad I thought of this. The non-conference schedule this year is not great if you're Xavier, right? If you're talking from a home perspective, Wake Forest is the only high major home game, and the rest of the games are basically 300 plus level teams. I think overall, though, you play TCU, you have a good exempt event down in Florida, you play on the road at Cincinnati. I think it is a fairly challenging non-conference schedule. It's just that for fans here in Cincinnati that are looking at the home schedule, totally understandable. It's not a great non-conference schedule at the Cintas Center. But the way you look at it, and something that Coach Horn was talking about, there's really no incentive for these high major teams to play the really good like mid-major opponents, especially if they're going to be low quad 3, potentially quad 4. The bigger incentive is to beat the lowest quality teams by 1 million because of the net, instead of beating a quad 3 team by 5 to 6 points, or hopefully if you're a high major team beating a quad 3 team, it's more than that. But the point is, a buzzer-beating win against Oakland last year, if Dalen Swain's shot had gone in, or Delaware, whichever game that was, that doesn't mean as much to Xavier as if you go and you beat Texas Southern by 60 on Monday night.
Yeah, and that was one of those, I would say, unintended consequences of moving to the net. Like, everyone for years was like, the RPI stinks. We should use them. We should factor in a more predictive model similar to KenPom, because it's a much better judge of who the best teams are. The problem is when KenPom, or now the net, which they kind of used the idea of KenPom's modeling to make it part of the net, when that wasn't on the team sheets, when it wasn't the deciding factor for teams to get in the NCAA tournament, it wasn't what they cared about in terms of scheduling, right? It was just a great way to measure who the best teams were. But now they're all trying to manipulate that statistic. So they're all trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we get the best metrics via KenPom or via, it's efficiency metrics is what we're talking about, scoring efficiency and defensive efficiency. Now everyone's trying to boost those numbers. And so to do that, you schedule the worst teams possible on either end of the floor, and it helps boost your net number by the end of the year. So that's kind of, while net or RPI or net or KenPom does a better job of figuring out who the best teams are, does a better job of figuring out who's the better team as compared to the RPI, it doesn't if the teams are manipulating it through their schedule.
And the last thing I would say too, Rick, when you look at the bye games, and I know that it does look bad when you're playing all these 300 plus level teams.
No, it sucks. Like, let's not try to sugarcoat that.
No, it does. But it's like, it's not like they're playing more. I mean, they're playing 6 bye games. It's not like they're playing more. They generally play 6 in a season. If they play a 3-game exempt event, it'll be 5, but you generally play 6 bye games in a season. So it's like this playing Texas Southern as opposed to, somebody ranked 200th. Does that really move the needle like that? Like, are you really not going to go because it's Texas Southern versus?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, would you rather have Oakland coming into the Cintas Center? That's the type. You want a team like Oakland that might beat you is the question. Yes, it might be a more fun game, but does it really move the needle much for you if you win it? And on the flip side, they might beat you. So is it worth taking that risk? That's exactly the calculus all the schedule makers and coaches are doing, and they've decided to go the route they've gone, obviously.
Rick.
All right, we've gone for an hour and a half now. I don't think there's anything left to say about this. Check out the Rebound Rundown. Check out the All In docuseries. Check out all of Paul's coverage on Twitter and the Sean Miller podcast social media pages.
Any deals? Are we running any deals? Any season opening deals?
I think there will. Not right now. It's not up yet, but I think there might be within the next few days. So if you want to sign up for Musketeer Report, do it. Now's a great time to do it. You'll get this entire season, then all of the transfer portal and all of next year's offseason with your annual subscription. So make sure you sign up for that. And we appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk more about all of this on the message board.